Hello, and thank you for tuning into Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people that are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, chair of the Division of Clinical Microbiology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And with me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the president and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. Hi, Bill. Welcome back.
Hi, Bobbi. As always, good to be back.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about too. Been a lot of things in the news.
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now in the world as it pertains to the world writ large, as well as to our corner of it here in the clinical laboratory domain. So yes, lots to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thought one of the first things we can mention is that the FDA has now officially withdrawn the role that would have allowed them to oversee LDTs as medical devices. So that's big news. We knew it was coming, or we assumed it was, but now we actually know it's definitive.
That's right. That rule has definitely it's been rescinded. It's off the books, which is something we use as like a saying. But in this case, it's actually is in a book, the Federal Register, and
Right.
so it has to be a process by which it is then removed from that Federal Register, and that's now completed. And it goes back to the lawsuit.
Mhm.
Then they had to let the ability to or the window of opportunity for the FDA to challenge the ruling in the district court, which they expired. So now, with the passage of time, that the rule itself has been rescinded. So,
Yes.
which is certainly welcome news for, I think, all of us. I don't think anyone with experience really thought that device regulations were appropriate for clinical laboratory tests. And certainly we're glad to have a judge rule in agreement with that as well.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. I don't think it would have made us safer. Obviously, there's a lot that we need to do as laboratory leaders to make sure our tests are safe and effective and affordable and available, accessible. But this regulations probably they wouldn't have done that.
No, they weren't designed to, and it was
Hmm.
really, we don't have to go, there's people can go back and listen to our prior podcast to kind of how
Yeah,
this evolved over time. Um, and going back to the position was if the FDA was going to have the authority to do so, it actually needed a new law because the FDA, any agency can only act in accordance with rules that are made by Congress. So that was the rule, the kind of the position all along is that if the FDA was going to go in this direction, at a minimum, they needed to have a new law passed with a framework, and they decided not to do that. Now, the reason why I think that's important is that one of the things we have to watch for is that the issue itself doesn't mean the issue itself is
right.
is is
It's
is no
gone.
longer with us. Exactly. It's still something we're going to have to be cognizant of and aware of in a couple of different ways. And part of that might seem to be, well, we just have to be watchful, which is sure, we do, and we have to maintain our advocacy within our healthcare organizations, with our local politicians, and state and federal as well. But then also it's a bit about how we think about our industry and how it's represented. I know you're part of CAP. There are a
Hmm.
number of organizations out there. One of the things that I believe I shared with you before was just part of the momentum behind this politically was the perception that there are labs out there that are bad actors that are just going to market with laboratory developed tests and not really keeping the needs of the patient first. And there's of course there were a lot of these. We see them continue with like COVID testing, and so even now some of the tail on that. So I think the other part is just to participate in our professional organizations and to always carry ourselves and our part of healthcare and our contributions to healthcare kind of to the highest standards.
Yeah, I agree. There's been a lot of talk about perhaps there is a category that might benefit from regulation, but it would probably be a small category, maybe 1% of tests or less, that are really those high risk black box types of tests that you can't go in and, open up the hood and see behind what's going on. They're not explainable. Maybe they have a proprietary algorithm. So there may be some needs for this.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Well, going back, if anyone wants to go back and listen, it was May 29th, 2004, when
Wow.
ACLA filed the lawsuit against FDA. So for folks that want to go back and listen to those podcasts, they'll have to go back at least a year.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. So yeah, 2000. Yeah. 2024, right? Not 2004. I think you might have said
Oh,
2004.
oh, yeah. Whoa, that would have been a way back.
That'd be way, way back.
2024.
There we go. Yeah. No, that's right. But and I think it's worthwhile because
Hmm.
um, and there is what I suspect is that I know there's a doctors caucus within Congress, and there was some talk about, well, should there be something should CLIA be kind of beefed up to cover the concept of lab developed tests? So there's more. I mean, the good news about the way Congress is supposed to work is that it gives opportunity for public comment and for us, and that's the reason to stay engaged. What we don't want to have happen, I think, is a feeling from a lot of labs with this most recent round where it just was all of a sudden it was there, and there were going to be all these unintended consequences, and it caused a lot of consternation. So I think to stay engaged in a proactive way rather than a reactive way is important. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll keep everyone updated on that as we hear more. But meanwhile, the other thing, Bill, I wanted to talk to you about was the new RESULTS Act, Reforming and Enhancing Sustainable Updates to Laboratory Testing Services Act. And this was a bipartisan bill, as you know, that was just introduced into Congress in September that really aims to more accurately determine Medicare reimbursement for labs tying payment rates to diagnostic tests to a not-for-profit commercial claims database. So it's kind of a mouthful, but basically this is addressing PAMA reform, something that we had
yes.
talked about also many times in the past.
Yeah, so just to kind of give people the panorama on PAMA,
Yeah.
which stands for, which kind of ironically, it stands for Protection to Access to Medicare Act.
Hmm.
So the idea was to make it sustainable. And of course, one of the challenges we have in labs is we have our own fee schedule, the clinical laboratory fee schedule. So as part of that piece of legislation, the thought was that the process by which the fees were going to be determined would be updated to be market based, meaning you would collect market data, that CMS would then use that market data to set rates for tests. Um, but the way that the data was collected in the first round, which has really only been one round of cuts, which we can get to, it was very heavily skewed towards what are deemed commercial labs or large reference labs, and so they tend to have the lowest reimbursement rate. So automatically, the way the data was collected really drove down the reimbursement for tests. And there are guardrails on how much they can reduce per year. I think in the first few years it was like 5%, and then goes up to 15%. So ACLA also took the CMS to court on this. The Secretary ACLA versus Azar, if you want to look it up, this was during the pandemic, to say that the way the data was collected was not in keeping with the way the law was written. The court ruled actually in favor of ACLA, but because of the nature of the agency in Congress and some things I don't fully understand, they actually didn't have the authority to say, we'll go back and do it differently. So it was a little bit of a not really a Pyrrhic victory, but it wasn't one that precipitated the kind of change we saw with FDA, where the court said to FDA, you got to stop this. That did not happen. So what's happened in the interim is, and I've had the opportunity to do this because, as you know, I'm part of the American Clinical Lab Association board. So in the early days of the pandemic, we argued with the administration to say, as part of the relief to labs, we should revisit PAMA. We should get a fix in. That was we were in the process of the legal action at the time. Um, what we got were a series of 1 year delays. And so what it did is basically continue to, starting in 2019, 2020, we started to push the clock back because we were just at the next iteration of having to collect this data and report it. And so here we are now at 2025, and we need, and really for a variety of reasons, which we can get into, another 1 year delay doesn't appear to be a tenable option, which means now we have to push really hard to get actually Congress to pass a law modifying that. And to your point, nice little summary, having good data collection is really key, because it's not really the intent of what PAMA was. It was the implementation that was really challenging, right? And it cut out a lot of hospitals. It cut out a lot of, and it was very onerous. The intimidating, the concerning and disconcerting thing is that no change is made. Then we have to comply with the law as written, which means we have to go back to like 2019 claims data as individual laboratories and get that data and get it to CMS. I mean, it's going to be pretty onerous. So
Owners.
yes, to say the
Hmm.
least. And now, because the clock was running during those delays, it's now the time the guardrails are wider. So I think now the cuts could be much even greater than they were with the first round. I think going from 5 to 15. I have to fact check myself
Yeah,
on that,
no,
but
I think you're right. Without congressional action, the rates would be cut up to 15%. And that's starting January 1st, 2026. It's not for all tests, but it's like 820 lab tests. It's quite a number. This would have a
it is.
major impact on laboratories. There will probably be some laboratories that would not be profitable. They may not be able to continue to offer patient services.
Yeah, no, it's a real issue. It's one we were so transfixed with FDA. It was sort of like for those fans of Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis, right? So we got past Scylla, but now we got Charybdis here on the other flank. So again, there are
Mhm.
other potential solutions, at least mitigating solutions, in addition to getting a law passed. But
Right.
there are some authorities that the administration has and CMS has around the way the law is written. There were that same doctors caucus and others from Congress wrote a letter to CMS saying, you have it within your authority to not actually implement those cuts. There's again, this is where they gets a very legalese and what is the opinion of different lawyers about the way the language is in a bill and what latitude do they have. But there is, if you hear wind of a push with the administration and CMS to try and get some relief, that's why, because there's some that argue that you have authorities, that CMS has some authorities that it can exert to actually stave off. They can change the data collection. They can delay that. They can make the cuts zero if it's up to 15%. There's some things like
Hmm.
that out there
Sure.
as well. So things that we can try and get behind. But and it's one of those challenging things, honestly, Bobbi, is that no one you talk to in Washington D.C., no one disagrees that it needs a fix, but the challenge is actually just getting it
Getting it
across the
because
finish
it's so
line.
expensive. Yeah.
It's expensive and just votes and distraction and everything else.
Well, this Results Act, it's worth following. And for those that have been listening to us for a while, they can go back to when our previous discussions about PAMA, but also the SALSA Act. That was the
Hmm.
previous act that was not passed, but that would have sought to reform this reimbursement process. So maybe the Results Act now will be successful. And it's my understanding they will work with, it would direct CMS to work with a third party that has a comprehensive private payer claims database that would hopefully be more accurate in representing the laboratory community, not
Yes.
just, it was really just a very small sliver of laboratories on which those fees were based before.
Yeah, I mean that's key. There are a few of them out there that they really have been created for the public good, often in response to other challenges around reimbursement in healthcare, where they're these truly neutral third parties that collect the kind of very holistic view of a market of what's being paid for a medical, service or test, and they have that data. The other thing that's in the Results Act is recognizing where that data is just not going to be very representative, right? When you have
Mhm.
like slow numbers, a recognition of what's a common test, so that you should be using big data to answer that question. So, I mean, it has a lot of good things in there. It also updates the reporting period. So, overall, I think it not only does fits better to the intent of the bill, which was to get market-based pricing, but also it is much less onerous for labs, right? Because the data exists. Well, it was just so so hopefully we'll get traction around that. I think it's important. One of the things with this is to there's a lot of different ways you can let your representatives in Congress know that it's of interest to you. I'm not sure if SAPI, I know the American Clinical Laboratories Association, if you go to their website, there are tools, there are campaigns, you can write letters, you can do things like that. You
Mhm.
have to check
Same
with
with
your
CAP.
yeah, you have to check with your organization first, because, for instance, Mayo Clinic has some rules about what we can and can't do. But I mean, it's important that I mean, with all of the issues that Congress will have to deal with in a shortened session now, it's really important um, that we voice ourselves as a community and as a important part of healthcare, that we need this for sustainability. Because my biggest concern, Bobbi, is just that this will hit a lot of there's a lot of hospitals, particularly that, in critical access or other areas that would be rural hospitals. We already have challenges with that and their financial sustainability. And labs are a big part of that. Labs, radiology, and surgery are the three kind of financial pillars of most hospitals. So it could really have not just even be about the lab testing availability, but just about healthcare availability in communities, So it's really important for us to get engaged.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's going to be a lot on the plate of our legislators, and they're going to need to know from us what's important. So if we speak up and let them know, then that should hopefully drive their attention towards these important issues. Yeah, and I think what you just said too is it's not just about laboratory; it's about all of healthcare. You can't have a hospital if you don't have a lab. How can you care
Exactly.
for a patient in the emergency room or the ICU if you can't get basic chemistries and blood work? So
Exactly.
it's essential to patient care,
That's right. And so get out, because then that's how a representative democracy is supposed to work, is that
right?
we let the people representing us know what's really important. So
Well, this was great. Two really important issues. So I'm sure these will come up again. Results Act, and then what's going to happen, if anything, with oversight of LDTs. Things to keep an eye on. We will keep everyone updated. So, Bill, thanks again for joining me on these important issues.
it's always my pleasure to join you. And what the other thing is, that there's all the other stuff out there that we don't even know about that we'll probably have to talk about at some point.
Oh, it'll come up soon, I'm sure.
It'll come up soon.
Okay, well, until next time. See you later, Bill.
See you, Bobbi.
Thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and tune in every other Thursday for new episodes.